Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you tried, your efforts were never enough? That the harder you worked, the more invisible you became? Well, let me tell you the story of Jessica, an ordinary woman who, for years, was overlooked, dismissed, and even erased from her own life by the people who were supposed to love her the most. But what happens when someone finally decides they're done playing small? What happens when you stop waiting for others to validate you and decide to believe in yourself? Today's story is not just about betrayal, favoritism, and family drama. It's about reclaiming your worth, standing tall in the face of adversity, and learning that the power to shape your future has always been in your hands. Jessica's journey wasn't easy. She was constantly compared to her younger sister, Claire, who seemed to excel in everything. But it was through these struggles, these moments of invisibility, that she found her true strength. Let me take you back to a quiet suburban home in Oregon, where Jessica was raised. From the outside, her family appeared perfect. Charming house, well-kept lawn, and family dinners around a warm table. But behind that picture-perfect exterior, there was a world that Jessica would soon come to know all too well. A world where expectations were higher than the stars, but love, respect, and validation, those seemed to fall through the cracks. You see, Jessica was the firstborn, the one who was supposed to be the shining star. Her father, a software engineer, dreamed of having a brilliant child, a child who could follow in his intellectual footsteps. Her mother, well, she had read over 40 books on child psychology before Jessica was even born. Every decision, every expectation, was built on the idea of raising a prodigy. But here's the thing about high expectations. They don't always work out the way you hope. By the time Jessica was 3, she still couldn't count to 20, and that's when the cracks began to show. Her mother, frustrated and worried, said what no child should ever hear. "I don't think she's capable of learning as fast as we hoped." And from that moment on, everything changed. Now, fast forward a few years, and enter Claire, the younger sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Where Jessica struggled, Claire soared. She was gifted in everything, from music to math, and soon became the focus of her parents' attention. Jessica, well, she learned not to expect anything. No praise, no recognition. Slowly, she became a shadow in her own home. The kind of shadow you don't even notice until the day you decide to step out into the light. And that light came at a cost, one that Jessica would eventually claim for herself. This opening sets the stage for Jessica's emotional journey, creating an immediate connection with the audience by addressing universal feelings of neglect and underappreciation, while also teasing the transformation and triumph that will unfold throughout the story. As the years went by, Jessica's sense of being second place became more than just a quiet feeling. It was as if the world around her had started shifting, and she no longer had a place to stand. It wasn't just her accomplishments being overlooked anymore. It was her very existence in the family home that seemed to disappear. The moment that broke her came when she was just 12 years old. You see, up until then, Jessica had her own room. It was her sanctuary, the place where she could escape the ever-watchful eyes of her parents. It was the one space where she could breathe, think, and simply be herself. The room had a window that looked out into the backyard, where the morning light would filter through the trees, creating soft beams that felt like warmth and promise. It was where she hung her artwork, worked on homework, and spent quiet afternoons reflecting on her dreams. That room was more than just a physical space. It was her space. But then, one evening, everything changed. Claire, her younger sister, barged into Jessica's room, her small voice barely more than a whisper as she announced, "Mom says I'm moving up here. This room's bigger, and I need space for my new study corner." Jessica, in complete disbelief, simply said, "No, this is my room." But Claire didn't argue. She simply walked out, leaving Jessica standing there, heart sinking. She thought maybe it was just a joke. Maybe Mom wouldn't really do it. But less than 24 hours later, Jessica came home from school to find her things had been moved out of the room. The room she had called her own for so many years was now Claire's. The new room that Jessica was given. It was tiny, cramped, and cold. The bed touched the wall. The desk was too small for both her books and her lamp, and the whole room felt like a forgotten afterthought. It was as though her parents had taken away the one thing that had been hers, her space, and given it to Claire without a second thought. She stood in the middle of the new room, fists clenched, her heart heavy with confusion and anger. How could they do this? Why would they do this? "Mom," she called out, her voice trembling. "Why would you do this? That was my room. I've had it since I was little." But her mother didn't even look up. "You're older now. You should learn to give way. Claire needs it more. Don't make a scene, Stephanie." That was all. No explanation, no sympathy. Just an order to accept it. In that moment, something inside Jessica broke. She wasn't just a child anymore, tucked away in the corner of her family's life. She was a shadow, quiet, unseen, and left to fade into the background. Her parents had made it clear. Claire was the one who needed to shine. Claire was the one who deserved the bigger room, the attention, the praise. And Jessica, well, she was just there. The lesson here is one of invisible erasure. It's easy for families to unintentionally push someone aside, especially when they start comparing one child to another. But when you strip someone of their space, their voice, their presence, you take away part of who they are. Jessica's room wasn't just a physical space. It was her sense of identity, her safe haven. When it was taken from her, it wasn't just a room. It was her place in the world that was being denied. As we move forward in Jessica's story, we'll see how this loss of space pushed her to a breaking point, a turning point that would lead her to stand up for herself in ways she never had before. But it all started with this small yet profound act of being overlooked by the people who were supposed to love her the most. Let's now dive deeper into how the betrayal continued in her life, leading to the breaking point where Jessica realized she had to fight for her future. As Jessica walked through the halls of her high school, something inside her shifted. She had worked hard, excelled in her own way, and now, with her high school graduation on the horizon, she thought, just maybe, this would be the moment where everything could change. Her family had always made it clear that only the best was acceptable, but now she had the opportunity to prove them wrong. She had received a partial scholarship to the University of Oregon, a place where she could finally carve out her own path, away from Claire's shadow. Her heart swelled with excitement at the thought of college. The idea of having her own space, away from the constant comparisons, made her feel like she could breathe again. But then came the moment that would shatter the last remnants of her hope. At a family dinner one evening, with her grandparents visiting from out of town, Jessica finally shared her big news. She had been accepted into the University of Oregon's business program. "I just got a partial scholarship, and I'm hoping to get more financial aid," she said, feeling a wave of pride rush through her. For the first time, she felt like she could stand tall, ready to finally step out on her own. But as she looked around the table, ready for her family to celebrate with her, her mother's face froze. Her father's eyes flicked to the side, avoiding hers. Then, with a slow exhale, her mother spoke. "Stephanie, your father and I have discussed this, and we've decided we can't provide more help with your tuition this year." Jessica blinked, confused. "What?" she whispered. Her father's voice broke the silence, cold and calculated. "We need to prioritize Claire. She's been invited to an Ivy League prep program. It's a rare opportunity." It was like the floor had dropped out beneath her. Claire, the one who had never needed to try, the one who had always had everything handed to her, was now getting more. Jessica stared at her parents, the weight of their words sinking in. "So, all the college savings you said were for both of us are going to Claire?" she asked, the words barely leaving her mouth before her mother sighed, almost too tired to continue the conversation. "Claire has real potential, Stephanie," she said dismissively. "You might want to consider starting at community college and transferring, or taking some time to work. That's not a bad option either." That was it. The dream that had once felt so close now seemed impossibly out of reach. Community college. That was all they thought she deserved. No praise, no encouragement, just an endless reminder that Claire was the one who mattered. Jessica didn't know whether to cry or to scream. She felt her heart sink, but what hurt even more was the apathy in their voices. The room went silent. The only sound was the clink of her grandmother's spoon against her plate, cutting through the thick tension. Then, as if on cue, Grandma Helen spoke up, her voice calm yet firm. "Linda, this isn't right," she said, her eyes meeting Jessica's. "You can't just dismiss your daughter like this." But her mother, still unwilling to see the truth, shrugged and returned to her lasagna. "It's for the best," she said, and the conversation ended there. That night, as Jessica cleared the dishes in the kitchen, she could feel her grandmother's gentle presence behind her. Grandma Helen placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice soft yet resolute. "You don't have to carry this burden anymore, Stephanie," she said, looking her granddaughter in the eye. "We'll pay for your college tuition. All of it. No loans." Jessica's heart ached as she realized that, despite everything, there was one person who truly saw her. Not because of what she could achieve for them, but because of who she was. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love us the most can let us down in ways we never expect. They may see our worth only in terms of how we fit into their ideal picture. But there's always someone out there. Someone who truly believes in you. They may not be the ones you expect, but when you find them, hold on to them tightly. Because it's not about the validation of those who overlook you. It's about the belief that you have in yourself, and the few who remind you that you're worth more than you've been told. Now, as Jessica set out for college, she was about to leave behind more than just a house. She was leaving behind the family that had never truly valued her. But this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would no longer be the shadow in her own life. Let's see what happened when she finally stepped into the world outside, ready to build something for herself, without the weight of her family's expectations dragging her down. The day Jessica left home was like no other. It wasn't a celebration or a grand farewell. There were no balloons or heartfelt goodbyes. There was no warmth in the air, only the chill of a long-anticipated departure that had been brewing for years. When Jessica had first received her college acceptance letter, she had imagined this day would be filled with excitement, with her family gathered around, cheering her on as she stepped into her new life. Instead, it felt like the moment she had been dreading for so long had finally arrived. The moment she had dreamed of, but never thought would truly come. As she packed her suitcase, each item she folded felt like an act of liberation, yet also an act of loss. The clothes she had worn for years now felt like they belonged to a different version of herself. The girl who was still waiting for her family to see her, the girl who still craved their approval. But as she zipped up her bag, she realized something important. She was finally letting go. It wasn't just the physical act of leaving, it was the emotional break. She was stepping into the world alone, with nothing but her ambition and the quiet support of her grandparents to carry her. And as she made her way downstairs, she could hear the distant sounds of her family in the other room, but she wasn't sure if they even noticed her leaving. Her mother, who had barely acknowledged the gravity of Jessica's college journey, stood by the door as if she were saying goodbye to a guest she didn't quite care about. She gave a half-hearted hug, saying, "Be frugal. Don't expect anything from us." Claire, on the other hand, didn't even look up from her phone. She was too absorbed in her own world to notice Jessica's quiet departure, just like she had been absorbed in her own achievements all these years. There was no recognition, no acknowledgement that this was Jessica's moment, just silence and a sense of being forgotten. And then there was the door. The door that had once symbolized warmth, comfort, and belonging now felt cold, distant and final. As Jessica stepped out, suitcase in tow, she took one last look at the house. The house that had been the stage for so many of her childhood memories, but also the place where she had felt unseen, unimportant, and unworthy of attention. She was leaving it all behind. As the door closed behind her, there was no dramatic moment. No farewell from her parents. But somehow, in that quiet moment, Jessica felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the relief of escaping. No, it was the relief of finally choosing herself. The drive to her grandparents' house felt like a journey to freedom. With every mile, Jessica could feel the weight of years of comparison, of expectations, of being second place, lift off her shoulders. It wasn't just about leaving home. It was about leaving behind the version of herself that had been molded by others' dreams and stepping into the person she was always meant to be. She arrived at her grandparents' house, the same place that had always felt like home, the place where she had been seen and valued for who she was. The warmth of their love embraced her in a way that her parents' indifference never had. Sometimes, leaving isn't just about moving physically from one place to another. It's about leaving behind the version of yourself that others have created and stepping into the one you're meant to be. It takes courage to walk away from everything you've ever known, but in doing so, you often discover the strength that was there all along. It's the first step toward reclaiming your identity, your path, and your life. Jessica's journey wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be her own. And as she settled into her new life at college, she knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but also filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine before. Now that she had taken this first step toward her own future, let's see what happened next, when Jessica's time at college would set the stage for something much bigger than just academic success. It was time for her to discover her own worth. And this journey was only just beginning. The first few months of college were a whirlwind for Jessica. Everything felt so new, so freeing, but there was a part of her that still carried the weight of her past. Those years of feeling like she didn't measure up. She knew she had the potential to do more, to prove that she was capable of standing on her own, but it wasn't going to be easy. She wasn't used to having the spotlight, to being seen for who she truly was. But in college something shifted. For the first time in her life, Jessica wasn't competing with anyone. There were no comparisons to Claire's academic achievements. She was surrounded by a new group of people who didn't know her past, who didn't have any expectations. And that freedom gave her the courage to be herself. Jessica dove into her studies with a fierce determination, not for anyone else's approval, but for her own sense of self-worth. She excelled in business, quickly gaining the respect of her professors. Late-night study sessions in the library became a regular part of her routine, as did long walks with friends, reflecting on how far she had come. But she didn't just stop there. She was determined to learn more about the world outside the classroom too. On weekends, Jessica worked part-time at a small cafe downtown, where she observed people and conversations. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her something priceless: insight. She learned how customers thought, how businesses interacted with people, and how small decisions could make a huge impact on a company's success. She understood the value of connecting with people and the power of good customer service. One day, during one of her shifts, her phone buzzed. It was an email from one of her finance professors, Dr. Elgin, who had been so impressed by her research that he recommended her for an internship at one of the most prestigious investment firms in Seattle, Bradley and Lane Capital. Jessica couldn't believe it. This was the kind of opportunity that she had dreamed about, one that could launch her career and prove to herself, and to the world, that she had the ability to achieve greatness without anyone else's help. The interview for the internship was nothing like she had imagined. The sleek glass conference room, the polished executives sitting across from her. It felt intimidating at first. But Jessica wasn't the same girl who had walked into college unsure of herself. This Jessica was confident, sharp, and ready to seize any opportunity that came her way. When the interviewers asked, "What do you think is the most important factor when creating an investment strategy?" Jessica took a deep breath and answered, "Understanding not just the data, but the psychology behind it." They exchanged glances, clearly impressed. And just like that, she was in. The internship was everything Jessica had hoped for and more. It wasn't just about numbers and reports. It was about understanding people, understanding behavior, and using that insight to make smart, calculated decisions. Jessica learned everything she could, from analyzing risk reports to building shareholder presentations. Each day was an opportunity to improve, to grow, to challenge herself. After the summer internship, Bradley and Lane Capital offered her a full-time position as a junior investment analyst. For the first time, Jessica could see her hard work paying off in ways that were tangible. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a professional, gaining real-world experience and making an impact. Her rise through the ranks wasn't a sudden leap. It was steady, deliberate, and built on years of personal growth and persistence. She had come so far from the girl who had been dismissed by her parents, ignored by her family, and left to fade into the background. Now, she was making waves in a competitive industry, proving her worth not just to others but to herself. The key takeaway here is that success doesn't always come instantly. Sometimes it's built step by step, day by day. Jessica didn't get to where she was by waiting for someone to hand her an opportunity. She went out and created it for herself. And every bit of hard work, whether it was late-night study sessions or taking on that part-time job at the cafe, was part of her journey toward greatness. The real lesson: success is earned, not given. And it often comes when you least expect it, after years of quiet perseverance. Jessica's journey wasn't over yet. Her experience at Bradley and Lane was just the beginning, and little did she know, she was about to face a challenge that would change everything. A challenge that would test not only her professional skills but her integrity. Let's move ahead and see how Jessica's rise through the ranks brought her face to face with a difficult truth, and how she handled it. As Jessica walked out of that house, suitcase in hand, it wasn't just a physical departure. It was the moment she decided to stop being the invisible daughter, the one who was never enough. It was the moment she decided to finally choose herself. And here's where I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a similar decision? Have you ever felt like you had to leave behind everything you knew to truly find who you are and what you're capable of? Maybe it wasn't a family situation, but a relationship, a job, or even a part of yourself that you needed to walk away from. Drop a comment below and let us know how you've faced moments of change or tough decisions like Jessica's. What did it take for you to walk away and choose your own path? Your stories are just as powerful, and I'd love to hear them. Let's start a conversation and remind each other that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that shape us into who we were always meant to be. Jessica's success at Bradley and Lane Capital was not just about getting the job. It was about proving to herself that she could handle anything thrown her way. The more she worked, the more she immersed herself in the company's projects, analyzing markets, and looking at client portfolios. But one day, her world of numbers, graphs, and reports suddenly took a sharp turn. It began with a routine review of a high-net-worth client's portfolio, a task Jessica had done countless times before. The numbers at first glance looked strong. The stocks were performing well, and everything seemed to be on track. But as she dug deeper into the reports, something didn't feel right. The figures didn't match the trends she was familiar with. The sales were far too high compared to the overall market performance. Jessica had learned how to spot artificial growth from her studies, and this was exactly what it looked like: inflated revenue. Late one night, she stayed up, poring over every single document, report, and financial statement related to the investment. Hours passed as she ran simulations and dug into the backlogs, connecting dots that seemed disconnected at first. What she discovered was staggering. The companies the firm had heavily invested in weren't growing organically as they appeared. They were inflating their own sales by engaging in internal transactions, essentially buying their own products to fabricate revenue. This was not just a minor issue, it was a scandal in the making. If it wasn't addressed, the firm would lose millions of dollars, and their reputation would be in shambles. Jessica didn't hesitate. She knew this was a make-or-break moment for her career, but more importantly, it was about doing what was right. The firm had been built on trust and integrity, and she couldn't let it be destroyed by a lie. She spent the next 48 hours putting together a comprehensive report. The analysis was in-depth, supported by numbers, charts, and projections. She didn't just present the problem, she proposed a solution, a way to pull out of the investments before the firm lost any more money. The morning she walked into the executive boardroom, her hands were clammy, but her heart was clear. She wasn't just presenting a financial risk, she was presenting the truth, and the truth had to be heard. She stood tall, holding her 42-page analysis, and with calm precision, began explaining what she had found. The silence in the room was thick, as the executives listened, stunned by her findings. When she finished, there was a pause. The CFO, who had been watching her closely, turned to the CEO. His voice tight with disbelief. "She just saved the company," he said. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Then the CEO spoke, his voice tinged with respect and awe. "We'll act on this immediately. Thank you, Jessica." In the following days, the portfolio was completely restructured according to Jessica's proposal. Her recommendations were implemented, and within 6 months, the firm had not only avoided a massive loss but had seen an 11.4% growth, the highest in 7 years. Jessica's name was now synonymous with integrity and strategic thinking. But the story didn't end there. Her success didn't just change the company. It changed how the firm saw her. They didn't just see her as a junior analyst anymore. She had proven that she was capable of leading with courage and conviction. The key takeaway here is that doing the right thing is never easy, but it is always worth it. Jessica could have easily stayed silent, let the issues slide, and watched the company's downfall unfold. But instead, she chose to speak up, to confront the truth, and in doing so, she not only saved the company but set herself apart as someone who could be trusted to lead. In any career, especially in high-stakes environments like finance, integrity isn't just a quality, it's the foundation for true success. When you choose to stand by what's right, even when it's difficult, you build a reputation that lasts far longer than any short-term success. Jessica's actions didn't just save the company, they set the stage for her next big opportunity. As she continued to work tirelessly, something bigger was coming, something that would change her life even more. The challenges she'd faced until now had built her into the leader she was about to become. But this new chapter was about to bring more than just professional recognition. It would bring a transformation in her personal journey that she hadn't yet seen coming. Let's move forward and see how Jessica's discovery led to a whole new challenge, one that would test her in ways she could never have imagined. It had been a year since Jessica uncovered the financial scandal that nearly brought Bradley and Lane Capital to its knees. Her name was now well known within the company, respected by colleagues and executives alike. After the restructuring and her contributions to the firm's success, she was finally being recognized for the hard work she had poured into every project. The CEO called her into his office one afternoon, and with a smile that spoke volumes he said, "We're creating an entirely new position, Chief Strategic Investment Officer, and there's no one more deserving than you." Jessica was overwhelmed with a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the title or the pay raise. It was the culmination of everything she had fought for, everything she had worked so hard to achieve. This wasn't just a career milestone. It was a validation of her worth, something that had been so hard to come by in her life, especially in her family. To celebrate, Jessica decided to throw a small party, a gathering with her closest friends, a few trusted colleagues, and her grandparents, the two people who had always believed in her. She wanted it to be a quiet, intimate event, a chance to reflect on how far she had come and share the moment with those who had supported her. After everything she'd been through, this party was meant to mark a new beginning, not just professionally but personally. She had saved up some money, transferred the funds to her mother for catering and decorations, and asked her to handle the guest list. It was a gesture of hope, a belief that this time, her family could come together and celebrate her. It felt like a chance to start over, to bridge the distance that had long separated her from her parents. But when Jessica arrived at the house that evening, what she found wasn't the small, intimate gathering she had imagined. The house was lavishly decorated, more so than she had expected. White orchids covered the tables, soft golden ribbons adorned the staircase, and the scent of gourmet dishes filled the air. It was clear that her mother had gone above and beyond. But something was off. As she stepped inside, Jessica saw her grandparents chatting with some relatives by the bar. Claire, dressed in a striking red satin dress, was standing at the top of the stairs, her face perfectly made up. Walking beside her was a tall, polished man Jessica didn't recognize. People began gathering around, and just as she was about to speak, her mother stood up, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Dear family," she began, her voice warm and inviting. "We're here today not just to reconnect, but to celebrate something truly special. Claire and her boyfriend Andrew are officially engaged." The words hit Jessica like a freight train. For a moment she couldn't move. Her gaze flickered to her mother, but there was no recognition in her eyes. No acknowledgement that this evening was supposed to be for Jessica. Just a gleaming announcement of Claire's engagement, turning what was meant to be a celebration of her hard-earned promotion into an event that revolved entirely around her sister. As the room erupted in applause, Jessica felt her heart drop into her stomach. She had planned this moment so carefully, had hoped that, just this once, the attention would be on her. But once again, Claire's life was the one that took center stage. Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, her father grabbed her wrist. His grip was tight like a cold, unspoken command. "Don't ruin this," he muttered, his voice sharp and controlled. "If you make a scene now, don't expect anything else from this family. No contact, no inheritance, nothing." The words stung, but Jessica didn't flinch. She had endured this treatment for too long to let it define her anymore. She pulled her wrist free, took a deep breath, and walked to the center of the room, her mind made up. "Excuse me, everyone," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "May I have just a moment?" All eyes turned to her. Claire paused mid-step, confusion flickering in her eyes, and her mother's smile faltered. Jessica looked around the room, meeting the gazes of everyone present. She raised her glass, but instead of celebrating Claire's engagement, she made a simple statement that cut through the tension. "This gathering today," she began, "was planned to celebrate a major milestone in my life. I was recently named Chief Strategic Investment Officer at Bradley & Lane, a major financial firm in Seattle." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'm the one who sent the money for this event. My mother agreed to organize it and never once mentioned it would be turned into an engagement party." The room fell silent, and murmurs rippled through the guests. Jessica's parents didn't move. Her father's face turned a deep shade of red, but Jessica didn't look away. "I'm not against Claire's engagement," she continued, her voice unwavering. "What I can't stay silent about is the fact that my own family tried to erase me from my own moment, just like they did all throughout my childhood." Andrew, Claire's fiancé, looked between them, confusion in his eyes. "You told me this was just a family gathering," he said quietly, his words cutting through the tension. Jessica's father snapped at him, but before he could say anything more, Andrew set his glass down and walked away. Claire's face flushed with panic, and she rushed after him. The room was still too still. Her father's fury erupted. "You should know your place, Stephanie," he shouted. "This is still our home, and you've overstepped your bounds." "No," Jessica interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "This is a place built on favoritism. It's not a home anymore." Turning to her grandparents, who had been silently observing the scene, Jessica's heart swelled with love. They had never made her feel less than, never treated her like she was invisible. Grandma Helen's eyes met hers, and Grandpa Arthur squeezed her hand gently. "This family's definition of love is broken," Jessica said quietly. "I don't need them to know who I am. I know who I am." With those words, Jessica walked out of the house, the place where she had once hoped to be seen and loved. She didn't need their approval anymore. She had already proven herself. The lesson here is simple yet powerful. You are worthy of your moment. You don't have to stand in the shadows of others, waiting for them to validate you. When you choose to stand up for yourself, even in the most painful of moments, you take back your power. You don't need to play by anyone else's rules. Jessica's confrontation was a turning point, not just in her professional life, but in her personal journey. She had learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to claim what's rightfully yours. Your voice, your moment, your story. As Jessica walked out that door, her head held high, she left behind a family that had never fully supported her, but she also stepped into a future where she would never again let anyone dim her light. The road ahead would be challenging, but it was hers to walk. And nothing, no betrayal, no hurt, could ever take that from her. Jessica stepped out of her parents' house that night, the echo of her footsteps on the porch the only sound she could hear. Her heart pounded, but there was a strange peace settling in her chest. She had said the words. She had finally taken the mic, both literally and figuratively, and claimed her space. For so long, she had been waiting for a moment like this, a chance to stand up and be seen. And when the moment came, she didn't hesitate. As she walked down the path, her mind replayed the confrontation. Her parents' faces, contorted with rage and disbelief, were burned into her memory. Her mother, too stunned to respond, had let her words hang in the air, while her father tried to assert his control as he always had. But this time was different. She didn't shrink. She didn't apologize or back down. For the first time in her life, she had faced the truth. Her family would never see her the way she deserved to be seen. But she didn't need them to anymore. She had already found her worth within herself. She had already earned it. The drive back to her grandparents' house was a blur. The weight that had always felt so heavy on her shoulders seemed lighter now, as if she had shed a skin she didn't even know she had been wearing. Her grandparents were waiting for her when she arrived, and as soon as she stepped through the door, Grandma Helen wrapped her arms around Jessica in a quiet embrace. "You did what you needed to do," Grandma Helen whispered softly, her voice filled with pride. Jessica nodded, her emotions threatening to spill over. She had spent so many years chasing approval from her parents, from her sister, from everyone. But in that moment with her grandparents, she realized something important. She didn't need anyone's permission to take her place in the world. The warmth of their home, the comfort of their love, reminded her that there were people who saw her for who she truly was. People who had always believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. As she sat down with them, telling them about the confrontation, about her family's reaction, Jessica felt a calmness she hadn't known before. She wasn't running from anything anymore. She was standing on her own 2 feet, claiming her right to exist, to succeed, and to be celebrated. The lesson here is about claiming your moment, no matter how difficult, no matter how uncomfortable. Often, we wait for the world around us to recognize us, to celebrate our achievements, but sometimes we need to take that power back ourselves. We have the right to stand in our truth, to claim our victories, and to demand the respect we deserve. Jessica had spent so many years waiting for her family's approval, letting their neglect define her self-worth. But she realized that her value was never about their recognition. Her worth was built on her actions, her resilience, and her integrity. And once she embraced that truth, she could step into any room, into any moment, and claim what was hers. Her confrontation with her family wasn't just about standing up to them. It was about standing up for herself. It was the moment she decided that she didn't need to wait for others to make space for her. She would make her own space. As she sat there with her grandparents, feeling the warmth of their love and acceptance, Jessica knew that her journey was just beginning. The road ahead might still be difficult, but she was ready. She had already claimed the most important victory of all, the victory of self-belief. With her heart lighter than it had been in years, Jessica took the next step in her journey. And the future, for the first time, seemed wide open, no longer defined by her family's expectations, but by her own dreams and desires. Let's see where this new chapter will take her. The days following Jessica's confrontation felt surreal. She had left her parents' house with her head held high, yet part of her still braced for the fallout. Her family had always been so quick to judge, so ready to wield their control. Would they reach out? Would they try to mend things? Or would they cut her off completely, just like they had threatened? For the first few days there was nothing. No phone calls, no messages. Her mother didn't try to apologize, and Claire, as expected, didn't reach out either. It was as if Jessica had never existed to them, once again dismissed and erased from the picture. But then the phone rang. It was her mother. Jessica took a deep breath before answering. She had expected the call, but not the words that followed. "Stephanie," her mother began, her voice tight and sharp. "You humiliated your sister in front of the whole family. You don't know what you've done." Jessica listened quietly, her heart pounding in her chest, but this time there was no anger, no frustration, just a calm certainty that she wasn't the one in the wrong. "I didn't humiliate anyone, Mom. I told the truth. I stood up for myself for the first time in my life. I won't apologize for that." Her mother's response was a cold, dismissive sigh. "Well, you should be sorry. You've crossed a line. And if you think you can walk away from this family without any consequences, you're wrong. Don't expect to ever come back." As Jessica stood there, phone pressed to her ear, the weight of her mother's words began to settle in. This was it. The final break. She had always hoped for a moment of reconciliation, a chance for her family to see her for who she truly was, but it was clear now. They weren't going to change. They weren't going to give her the love or respect she had longed for. But instead of feeling devastated, Jessica felt free. She had spent years trying to gain their approval, trying to fit into a mold they had crafted for her. And now she realized she didn't need to be a part of that. She was enough just as she was. Later that evening, she sat with her grandparents, telling them about the call, about her mother's harsh words. Her grandmother, who had always been a pillar of strength and wisdom, gently took her hand. "You've done what many can't, Jessica," Grandma Helen said softly. "You've chosen yourself. And that's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of." For the first time, Jessica allowed herself to feel the weight of those words. She had chosen herself. And that choice was the most powerful one she could make. Her grandparents had always been her safe haven. Their unconditional love and support had helped her find the strength to confront the truth and claim her place in the world. They were the family she had longed for, compassionate, understanding, and real. And in that moment, Jessica realized that the love she had been seeking from her parents wasn't something she could earn or force. It had to be freely given. And since that wasn't going to happen, it was time to stop seeking it altogether. The lesson here is that sometimes the hardest thing we have to do is let go of what we've always wanted. The approval, the recognition, the love from people who are unwilling to see us for who we truly are. It's hard to walk away from a family, but it's even harder to stay in a situation where you're constantly made to feel unworthy. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for your own growth, peace, and happiness. Jessica's final break from her family wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her true freedom. And as she sat there with her grandparents, feeling the warmth of their love and the calm of her decision, she knew one thing for certain. She had made the right choice. With the past behind her, Jessica was ready for what came next. Her career was thriving, and her sense of self had never been stronger. But this wasn't just about professional success. It was about finally feeling at peace with who she was and where she was going. And as we move forward, we'll see how Jessica's journey continued to unfold, how she embraced her future without the weight of her past holding her back. She had already conquered so much, and now the world was hers to take. As Jessica sat at her desk in the corner office of Bradley and Lane Capital, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. Only a few years ago, she had been overlooked, dismissed by the very people who were supposed to support her. She had spent so much of her life trying to meet expectations that were never really hers to begin with. But now, sitting at the top of her career as the Chief Strategic Investment Officer, she realized that the success she had achieved wasn't just about the title or the pay. It was about finally finding peace with herself. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her grandparents. "We're so proud of you, Jessica. You've always been worthy." Those words hit her in a way she wasn't expecting. It was the kind of support that she had always wanted from her parents, but had never received. Her grandparents had always seen her for who she was, not for who they wanted her to be. They had believed in her before she ever believed in herself, and that unconditional love was what had kept her going. Jessica paused and looked out the window, watching the city below. She had built a life for herself from the ground up, but what mattered most wasn't the job title or the accolades. It was the quiet confidence that came with knowing she had earned everything on her own terms. Her journey had been long, full of ups and downs, but it had taught her something invaluable. True success is not measured by others' approval. It's measured by your own sense of peace, your own belief in yourself. She had spent so much time seeking validation from her family, from her colleagues, from the world around her. But now, she realized that she didn't need any of that to feel complete. She had already proven to herself that she was enough. As the days passed, Jessica's life began to feel more grounded. She no longer carried the weight of her past, of the family that had never truly seen her. Instead, she filled her time with things that brought her joy. Long walks through the park with her grandparents, late-night talks with friends who supported her without question, and moments of quiet reflection where she could simply breathe. For the first time in years, Jessica felt whole, Not because she had everything, but because she had found peace with who she was. She no longer needed to be the person her family expected her to be. She didn't need their approval. What mattered was that she had learned to trust herself, to stand tall in her own truth. The lesson here is clear. True peace comes from within. We can spend our lives seeking validation, approval, and recognition from others, but the real victory is in learning to validate ourselves. When you stop seeking external approval and start trusting your own worth, you discover a kind of success that's more fulfilling than anything anyone else can give you. Jessica's journey wasn't just about career achievements. It was about emotional growth, self-acceptance, and finally stepping into the life she was meant to lead. And with that newfound peace, she was ready for whatever came next. As the sun set on another day of success, Jessica smiled, knowing that her future was no longer shaped by the shadows of the past. It was her future now, one she had earned and one she would continue to create with every step she took. The road ahead was hers to walk, and she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the strength, courage, and peace she had always carried within her. The journey had only just begun. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to Jessica's story. It's not just a tale of betrayal and struggle, but one of resilience, self-worth, and the power of choosing yourself. The lesson here is simple yet profound. You don't need anyone's approval to be worthy. Your value comes from within, and no matter how many times you've been overlooked or pushed aside, your strength is always there, waiting to be claimed. So, after hearing Jessica's journey, what are your thoughts? What lessons stood out to you the most? I'd love to hear your feelings and reflections, so please share them in the comments below. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales that inspire and uplift. I look forward to bringing you more stories that remind us all of the strength we have inside. Until next time, take care and keep believing in yourself.